Watch, where public policy is openly discussed and elected officials can report their activities directly to the people, unfiltered and unbridled. I'm your host, Elizabeth Allen Hodge, and in the studio today, our guests are Representative Darrell Bolz in his 6th term from District 10B, Canyon County, and Representative Vito Barbieri, 1st term from District 3, that's up in Kootenai County. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Darrell, I'd like to start with you. You're a member of JFAC. How long have you been on?
This is my 10th year on JFAC.
And that's Joint Appropriations and Finance
Right.
Committee. And I'd like you to tell us a bit about the responsibilities of JFAC and the process. Take, for instance, how do you determine or establish a number to use when you're setting a budget?
Okay. Thank you for the question, Elizabeth. JFAC is the budget setting committee of the legislature, and a lot of people don't understand it is the only joint committee of the legislature, which means it has 10 members of the House and 10 members of the Senate. So it's a little bit different than what most other committees in the legislature are. As far as setting a number for what we're going to set the budget to, which we just did last week, basically at $2.667 billion for this next year, okay? That process is kind of a combination of things that happens. The governor, of course, comes forth with what he thinks the revenue projection is going to be. And then we have an economic outlook revenue committee that meets. It's a legislative committee. And they also then come up with a number. And they do go through a process where they spend about a day and a half or two of listening to all different kind of economics and people from throughout the state of Idaho who have a knowledge of what they think the economy is going to be doing for the next year type situation. And they actually go through a process of voting and finding out where they're going to be, and everybody picks a number that they want to be at. And then they choose where that number is, and then they come up with a median number type situation, and then they present a report to JFAC. Then we look at the two different numbers and we decide which number we're going to take, whether we're going to take the governor's number or whether we're going to take the number from the Economic Outlook Committee. This year we chose a number from the Economic Outlook Committee, which was less than the governor's number by about $33 million, if I remember. So it's a little bit less, okay?
33 million.
Pocket change, okay? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so also, we're talking about the general fund here.
Right.
What does that include in the general
Okay,
fund?
general fund is basically the revenue that comes into the state from sales tax and income tax, okay? We also have 2 or 3 other sources of funds that we use when we start setting budgets. We have the general fund that we just talked about. We have dedicated funds, which basically are fees and things that can be, for example, transportation department works off of dedicated funds on the gas tax. Fish and game department is an all dedicated fund source where they take the revenue off of the licenses and things that they sell. And then you also have federal funds that come in. Of course, education and health and welfare are the 2 bigger users probably of federal funds of anybody, with Medicaid being the primary one that does that. And then we also have endowment funds. Mm-hmm. And endowment funds are kind of a special little thing that's the lands that the state owns that they get revenue off of, primarily off of forest lands and this type of thing from the sale of timber and such. And all of those funds come together then, and we go through and figure out which proportion of those funds are going to make up the particular budgets. Like the Department of Finance, Department of Insurance, our fees that they sell from licenses and things like that, they are totally dedicated. There are no general funds in those budgets whatsoever. So when we start the budget setting process, we normally start out with those budgets first and go through those a little bit, then start working into the ones that are basically all general funds. Like Department of Correction has a large user of general funds, although they do get a few federal funds as well and have a few dedicated funds, but not very much. Most of them tend to be primarily on the general fund side.
Okay, so you start with the endowment and the dedicated funds. Does that help you? Take, for instance, I know that the endowment funds help fund part of the higher education in our state, and yet you have the general fund too. So does that help you to say, I know how much I'm going to get for the universities from the endowment fund. Now I need to make up the rest of it through the general fund. Is that how you?
Well, yes and no. The endowment funds are a very small portion of the total budget. When you start looking at public schools, which will be a budget of probably around $1.5, $1.6 billion of the general fund, your endowment fund there is only going to be like $30,000, $40,000 or so. It's a very small, or million. I'm sorry, it's thousand.
Oh,
I'm not used to talking in millions so much, but it's a pretty.
It's going to be how much?
I think around $30 million, if I remember, $31 million, somewhere in that ballpark. Yeah, only, yeah.
Okay.
But when you're talking about a $1.6 billion budget, it is a pretty small percentage in a large respect. Okay, and one of the things with the endowment funds that we started doing about 3-4 years ago was to even that out. The Endowment Investment Board is the board that basically looks at the endowment funds, and they keep track of all those things and figure out what the earnings are going to be, and they put so much money into what they call an earnings reserve account. And then we use what comes off, and we get the earnings that we use, and we put that into the budget. Well, we used to run on a process where as the earnings went up, then the public schools would get a lot of money. Then the next year, if the economy went down and they didn't get as much, then their numbers were down. And you couldn't really set a stable budget by that way. So what they've tried to do is to even that out so that each year you have about the same amount of money from the endowment fund that goes in there. And the endowment fund basically is used for public schools. It's used for the College of Agriculture. They have an endowment fund. And you also have it for the state hospitals and such. And those are the primary places that get endowment funds. I think there's also a little bit of endowment fund for the prison system as well. Yeah.
Okay, so if you were going to talk just the general fund, how much of it goes to education versus other? Can you
public school?
Break a pie?
Oh yeah, that's pretty simple to do. Really, you have about 3 areas that comprise about 94% of the budget. Okay, public schools will be right at 50%. When you figure higher education and the medical education and professional technical, you're looking about another 15%. So typically you're looking right about 65% of the general fund budget goes for education, okay? Health and welfare with Medicaid included in that is going to be about another 20%. And then the area what we call public safety, which includes adult corrections, juvenile corrections, the judiciary, and state police, is about another 8 or 9%. And over the last 2 or 3 years, you're looking at about 93, 94% of the general fund budget on those 3 areas alone. So all the rest of state government is run off about 5.5%, 6% of the general fund.
Wow. Okay.
And so when you start looking at where we've been in the last 2 to 3 years in the economic downturn, we could have done away with all the rest of the state government and not funded and not balanced the budget. That's the seriousness we've had in the budget in the last 3 years, okay?
Tell us a little bit about the economic forecast.
Well, the economic forecast right now, we're looking at about a 4.5% income and revenue over last year right now. That's what's projected. I have some concerns about where we might end up just based on the recent announcement here in the last couple of weeks or so about the price of gas going up close to $5 by Memorial Day, and I think that could have a real impact in terms of where the economy goes. Because you know as well as I do that this country basically deals with transportation issues, and how do most of our goods get to where we need them? It's by road, by trucks to a large extent. And as the price of fuel goes up, they're going to increase their rates. They're going to have to. There's no way they can make it without it. And so that's going to cause some inflation in terms of prices of every good that you get.
I don't think, it's very interesting. I wish children were taught more of this at school. You hear the cost of gas is going up, and that makes people unhappy, and they talk about, well, that means people will have staycations, they won't go here. But the point that you just made is when the cost of gas goes up, the truckers are hit. The producers who can the groceries that go in the grocery store, everything goes up. And bottom line, when moms and dads go in the store to buy their children food and shoes, those costs go up.
Yeah, and you tie that all in, and you wonder why people are having such a hard time when all of the prices of goods and consumables that they purchase goes up. But when you're in an economy where they're not getting any salary increases, they're having to do, well, like we've done in government to some extent, hopefully anyhow, a little bit more with less, okay?
Now, what about, are there any proposals for increasing? I know that there was a tax that they were talking about. Was it the liquor tax that they were talking about raising, or?
Tobacco.
Tobacco
tax,
me.
yeah.
So they call them sin taxes.
Right,
Okay,
right.
so is the legislature, I'll ask both of you gentlemen, I don't think the people are in a mood for a tax increase, but what is the legislature thinking?
Well, the potential for a tax increase on tobacco products right now is still residing in the Revenue and Taxation Committee. And some of the people, I don't know, some of the people I talk to anyhow that sit on that committee don't think that it'll ever come out of committee this year, okay? I don't know if you've been hearing the same thing or not, Vito.
However, streamlined sales tax
Right,
is coming. So
And what's that?
that is a scheme, if you will, to begin to tax internet and catalog sales from out of state, such that a company that sells a certain threshold of volume will be required to file an income tax return and pay a tax to Idaho if they sell goods into Idaho. And of course, the inverse is true. Companies selling from Idaho to other states that are a part of this pact, and that's what the streamlined sales tax is a pact of other states, selling into those other states would be required then to file income tax returns. And not income tax returns.
Income or sales?
Sales tax.
Sales tax.
Sales tax
Okay, so
returns.
how does that work with our neighboring state of Oregon, where there's not a sales tax?
Not much relevance there. I don't even know if they're part of the pact. It's only those that are that have sales tax.
Okay, you know, that's one of the things that's always struck me is it's very difficult to compete with states that don't have sales tax. It's all equally difficult for businesses to compete with states that don't have a corporate income tax. And it seemed like for a while the mood was to try and lower those things, but certainly doesn't seem like a possibility.
Well, there is a move in Idaho to lower both corporate and individual income tax. The term that we use is how do we pay for it, which is kind of a perverse way of looking at it. But back to the streamlined sales tax, the fairness issue of which you speak is what they're using as the reason to bring it, is that those brick and mortar companies within the state are paying that sales tax, but when an internet company sells into the state, they are able to actually undercut or compete better because they don't have to pay that sales tax. I'm not sure how shipping and handling figures into that, whether that's calculated in their rationale or not, but that is the rationale they're putting forward.
Shipping and handling is something that's of interest to me because I've been watching, as I'm sure everybody does, these commercials, these infomercials, and they say, but wait, you know, for just extra shipping and handling, we'll send you two. Now, they could send two in the same box, right?
Right.
But they don't.
No.
They send the other piece separate and charge shipping and handling. It seems to me that's where somebody's making their money, is in shipping and handling. I don't know how all that works.
I hadn't thought of that, and that's an interesting observation.
I had thought a little bit about it from the standpoint that a lot of these items that you buy are very, very small, and yet the shipping and handling is very high. And I've always looked at it that a lot of times they advertise the cheapness of their product or the inexpensiveness, whatever term you want to use. And I think they make up for it in the shipping and handling, quite frankly. Okay.
Absolutely. So that's why I raised that, because you're talking about that in this streamline thing, creative ways to always find ways to get money, I guess. And I guess that's what you have to do when you're figuring out budgets. I mean, but you know, the folks out there, you and I, when we do our budgets, our family budgets, we can't be that creative. We just know what's coming in and what's going out. We'll be back in a minute.